Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 7 of the Weekly History Chaos podcast. I want to tell everybody thank you for coming back. If you checked out my previous episodes or if you're new to the show, listen in. This is a history show where I talk about different topics in history that I randomly draw on the show. And usually I'm going to pre select these topics, and today's topic in general, we're going to be talking about World War One, which I'll admit I am not as in depth about. I mean, if someone says, "Oh, I know all history," okay, it's probably not possible. I mean, people specialize in a lot of areas of history, and they're more knowledgeable about some areas than others. They might know key facts about some, but not everyone's going to know everything about everything. So I've been dabbling more into World War One recently. Which I'll tell you what, a lot of it's giving me a headache. I don't know why, but it's been so much easier for me to comprehend World War II stuff than World War One stuff. I don't know why. It's just a big transition to me, especially Austria-Hungary. Oh my gosh, that threw me through the loop trying to learn this. But I've got 6 or 7, well maybe 6 topics in here today to talk about. I'm gonna randomly draw them out. We'll talk about them, discuss, and yeah. So I hope everyone enjoys the podcast. If you could subscribe to me on whichever way you're following me, whichever place you're seeing this podcast at. If you see it on YouTube or if you're seeing it on an actual podcast app, then follow me there. I do appreciate it. I'm on TikTok as DOSBear. But other than that, let's get into the show. The first topic here. Let's see what we get. So hopefully I can say more than one sentence about these topics. That'd be kind of embarrassing. WW1, aircraft roles and effects of war on aeroplane development, which kind of propelled it, to be honest. So if you could think, like, difference between World War II and World War One, I mean, that's not that big of a difference in time compared in history, but there's a lot of technological differences between them, and like things really start, like World War One really progressed things like airplanes and stuff like that were very limited technology wise at the start of World War One, and because of war, it really pushed for innovations and for planes to become faster, more maneuverable, and harder to fly. In World War One, pretty much, they literally could take someone and give them like 30 minutes of training, and they could be a pilot. I mean, like that's how fast it could be to become a pilot. It was just a lot easier to be a pilot back then. Anyone could literally be a pilot back then, almost. But as technology progressed, they started putting strict guidelines so they get the most out of their pilots, and plus the machines got more expensive. But early airplanes, pretty much. So if you look at World War One, like the earliest form of airplanes, they're using them for scouting, aerial photos, which was very difficult. They had to fly planes very, very straight and not like pretty much without it having turbulence. They had to have a very smooth flight for them to capture photos and be able to see anything in them in World War One. So that was very challenging. So they had to have good pilots for that. Other things they did, just basic scouting. They use them for delivery of orders and messages. So they could have them, and they'd have a capsule they could drop. They would have the messages for troops on the ground, like the orders. That was one use. They also did like fighter pilots. I mean, obviously, hear about the Red Baron and things like that. It did happen. I mean, they did fight other planes. Dogfights did happen. It became so like usually pilots would carry a pistol, and as time went on, they eventually got to the firing mechanism down to where a machine gun could fire between the propeller blades. So that means that guns could fire, directly in front of the plane. That's where kind of dogfighting developed at. Because before that they couldn't. But once that developed, dogfighting kind of became a thing between different planes. It also became a propaganda thing too. These are our aces. This is it's just a good way to show off your military might. Just having a successfully proven pilot, if that makes sense. Plus, it's a whole new area of war, really. Other things were like you see like conventional bombers. They started using them to like planes to drop bombs, very limited amounts of bombs, but they were dropping them down. Sometimes it'd be so low just because that way they could accurately hit. They'd be like really close, so they could drop the bombs. The earliest thing drop would be like shrapnel, like literally dropping just pieces of metal over spread out. They would drop it higher up, spread out over a large area. Hopefully, it falling would hit someone. Things like that. Then the blimps, obviously, Zeppelins. In Zeppelins, they did terror bombings against the UK And they were a really big threat. The Zeppelins were only a threat mainly because shooting them down was very difficult. That was the biggest thing. It's because if it'd get around up there, it would puncture, but it wouldn't blow up the Zeppelin. So it'd be very difficult. But once incendiary rounds, they designed a round that would pierce it, and then it caused an incendiary spark, which would then ignite the Zeppelin. At that point, the Zeppelins literally became outdated. They were no longer useful for that. So that's one way. Like, I mean, Zeppelins pretty much went away. And so then it really came down to just actual airplanes, actual bombers. Yeah, I think I covered about everything there. Really just spotting, reconnaissance, all the basic things. Just that you look at the earliest planes in World War One and at the end of war, I mean, like, plane advancement really took off. And it became a priority because of war. So yeah, I'm pretty much saying good things do come out of war sometimes. I mean, it's very true. You see some of the biggest progression in technology in general during times of war. It just happens. There's a need for it. People join together collectively to figure things out. The government puts more money into it. So yeah, pretty fun topic. Let's go on to topic 2. And by the way, if anyone's interested, I have been reaching out to people about getting guests on the show. That way I will read them topics and they will talk about it. Maybe I'll throw in some stuff about the topic, which would be really cool for me. I kind of take a, sit back here and listen in. It'd be nice to be the guest sometime. I guess be the viewer in a way. It'd be kind of cool. But yeah, I've been talking to a couple people. I think one kind of ghosted me, sadly. But the other one I'm still looking forward to in December, and then I'm emailing one right now. I don't know if he's gonna be super interested or not. I don't want to give out his name, but I don't know. I might have flubbed it up a little bit here, but this is a new podcast. I don't have that many viewers on here, but the thing is, though, is that the people that do view it, I mean, I make these to be personal because even if I only had 25 people each week listen to this, I enjoy the 25 people that get to listen to it. I mean, if y'all, I mean, obviously, if y'all didn't enjoy it, you wouldn't listen to it. That makes sense to me. So as long as some people enjoy it, I'm going to keep making it, and hopefully more people eventually like it and want to watch more of it. But if anything, I'm just happy for the ones that I do have that watch it. So thank you. Okay, so topic 2 here. Let's see what we got. Trench warfare, obviously extremely broad, but for, obviously there could be someone on here who knows nothing about World War One. So pretty much when the Germans had the war start out and they were attacking France, they planned on defeating France in about 6 weeks. Sounds real similar to World War II. So they planned on defeating France very, very fast. That did not happen, okay? So as the German line pushed forward and they end up getting held up and they end up getting into a more static battle where just back and forth, no one's really gaining grounds. Well, as this happened, everyone just kind of started building defenses to hold the areas they had. So it literally ended up making this ginormously long trench line across eastern France, just kind of going up. It just made this long defense line. And by the way, they pushed through Belgium, just like World War II. So yeah, so they did the same move. Or I guess this was the first move. That's the first time they did it. But they pushed through Belgium. And the only reason they did Belgium is because Belgium, they actually asked Belgium to allow them to pass their army through to invade France, and Belgium said no. So they were like, well, okay, we're going to take out Belgium too. So yeah, that's how that went down. They got held up, and then trench warfare started. So they started digging, these trench lines got built, and then with things like artillery guns, 1 second, I got technical difficulty here. Oh, there we go. Sorry, my camera went out for a second. I know it don't affect the podcast listeners, but yeah, I want to make sure the YouTube side of this also gets to be able to see me. That was kind of odd. But, gosh, now my mind went blank. Okay, so because of artillery and machine guns, pretty much, these two things, having an automatic rate of fire and being able to put down a lot of rounds down range accurately, made it to where trench warfare really became static. And artillery being so accurate at the time, being able to call it in, and just the massive amount of artillery, it kind of made a standstill. Trench warfare was a very dirty warfare because as you dug down, I mean, you're getting into like mud and it's a pit. I mean, that's what it is. Reasons people died, I mean, they would be shot from machine guns, snipers from across the trench. They'd be buried alive. That would happen sometimes, just like in I mean, anything. A trench can collapse. They've been buried alive. Artillery rounds can collapse trenches because there's so much force it literally collapses them. Part of the trenches were usually underground, and they would dig them underground because they'd sometimes try to connect them to the enemy's trench and try to invade underground. That way they could avoid the machine guns. I mean, it was a very dirty war, and plus, just hygiene-wise, medically wise, there's just, I mean, you get down in that, you got what is it, trench foot and things like that. I mean, just a lot of diseases and things that affect morale. I mean, you look at the casualty rates, which I think I have a topic about this later, but there's a lot of casualties in World War One, and a lot of it's from actual combat, but from a lot of it's also wounded. It's considered a lot of it's from disease. But yeah, we'll get more into that later. But overall, trench warfare is pretty much literally trenches in the dirt. Machine guns, men, rifles, holding it down. Anyone attacks, they fight back. Artillery bombardments raining in the land between trenches. So enemy trench, allied trench, or however you want to look at it, two trenches. The land in between would be called no man's land because no man could live there. It was artillery, aircraft, snipers, machine guns, everything. It was literally the equivalent of death. So yeah, fun little topic. It's kind of a broad thing on trenches. Hopefully someone learned something new about them. And if you already knew about them, I am sorry. I'm going to the next topic. Let's see what we got. This is one I threw in there that's not World War One, but I want to talk about it. Recommendations for a history manga. So if anyone in here reads or likes to read, I don't know if anyone reads comics or manga on here that listens to me, but if you like those kinds of things, if you like anime, that kind of stuff, and you like history, I would ask you that you would check out the Kingdom Manga. It's a Japanese manga about the Warring States period in China. It's actually pretty accurate. The Warring States period in China does have a lot of like fantasy aspect to it in general. There's not a ton of exact details, but there is some details, and the story follows it pretty close. It follows the story of a boy named Shin and how he ends up wanting to become a great general and goes through his life and big battles. It's just really awesome, guys. If you like a epic story like that, it's phenomenal, and it's history based, which is there's not that many great history mangas out there, in my opinion, and this is like top tier, S tier history manga to me. So yeah, if anyone wants to check it out, it's the Kingdom Manga. I just want to throw this in there. I am not sponsoring anything with this. This is just something personal I wanted to throw in. Okay, here. Do a faster draw this time since I didn't expect to draw that one this time. I actually meant to draw that last podcast episode. I forgot about it. It was stuck on the side, and I was like, oh. Awesome, this is a perfect one. World War One casualties. The total killed in World War One, well, estimated total. Again, when you look back in history, there's a lot of estimations. You ask one historian or this historian, they're going to give you two different answers. They go off this info or this info. But 20 million is pretty close. So 20 million people, that's a lot of people in a war. That's why it's called the Great War. I mean, the war to end all wars. That's why there's 20 million. On top of that, there's 21 million casualties. That's a lot. But just to even wrap your head more around it, I mean, there's 41 million casualties right there, or 20 million casualties, 41 million people affected, so either deaths or wounded. The Spanish influenza was also around in World War II near the end of it, and the Spanish flu, influenza, but it killed around, okay, the estimation on it vary as well, but I mean, 50 million is a pretty safe estimation on it. I've seen outrageously higher numbers than that, and I've seen lower numbers than that. But I would say 50 million people died from the Spanish flu in World War One. So yeah, it was a great epidemic and pandemic that happened. It was horrible. That's one of the reasons why World War One affected the world so much mentally. Like, that's why you see a lot of it in the next 20 years after. It's because the amount of death and destruction that cascaded into the world, and plus just so many things hit at one time. I mean, you have people that go through World War One, they go through one of the world's worst epidemics ever in the world, period, Spanish flu, So they go through, World War One, and then they go through the Great Depression as well. After World War One, but they go through this, one of the worst influenzas, flus of all time that kills 50 million people. There's been so much death and terrible thing happens, between World War One and like World War Two. It's just really catastrophic. Um, Gosh, and a lot of these deaths were actually civilian deaths. Like you look at like soldier deaths, and it's about half, and then you look at civilian deaths, and it's like the other half. So there's a lot of civilian deaths in World War One as well. Another fast topic. Hey guys, if you have a way to reach out to me at any platform, let me know. Do you like when I talk about a topic for like a long time and really go in depth in it? Or do you like when I do like little short things about topics? Like which one do y'all really prefer? I've been kind of going back and forth because I've done short things about topics and I've told people that I need to give a more in-depth response about them. But then at the same time, I feel like sometimes I drone on a little too long. So yeah, if anybody has opinions, let me know. This is the one I was dreading. Austria-Hungary. Overall, and why it struggled as a nation. I'm not gonna lie to you. This one gave me a headache. I read this on multiple websites. I watched a couple of videos. I still had a headache. It's a lot of info. It's one of the most, I would say, one of the more complex nations to me. I mean, it's simple when you think about it and like, but when you try to compile it all in your head for a podcast, very not simple. Okay, so Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary exists. Hungary breaks away, has a war with Austria. Austria and Hungary fight. Russia steps in, defeats Hungary, right? Or helps defeat Hungary. And then Hungary and Austria actually rejoin, and they form the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Well, the weird thing about this is they form an empire together, and they form together to become one piece of land, but at the same time, they run separate governments. So Hungary has its own, Austria has its own, own government. Most of the Hungarian people didn't want the nations to join together. They still wanted independence. The only people that really wanted to join back together would be the higher ups, just for clamoring for power. Western Austria, Austria in general, but Western Austria has a lot of German speakers, and Austrian government's pretty much controlled by a lot of German-speaking people who don't share they don't share loyalties to the German nation, Prussia, German nation, but they do have they do have a lot of what's the word I'm looking for here? Prestige, pride. Oh God, they have expectations upon everyone else to think of them as higher than other people. They expect themselves to be treated better than, Romanians and stuff like that. So there's a lot of that in there politically. It's very complex. So the Emperor Ferdinand, like he's over. Okay, so he's over both of them. So he's over the entire thing. He's the absolute ruler, has control of the military and everything else, right? So here's pretty much what happens is you have like, I'm going to take an estimate here, but I'm going to say double-digit numbers of different populations within your empire that speak different languages. They're all extremely distant from each other. Most of them don't live in the same areas. There's going to be some minorities in areas, but a lot of them live, their main groups of them live far apart from each other. There's going to be minority groups in a lot of different areas. Like this is the main group here, but there's a minority group in there as well. And their biggest issue is just giving rights to their people. You got to think, you go back to World War One, go back in time, you don't have access to everything you do now. You can't just like Google a language, you can't Google translations and things like that. It's not very easy, and like the schools and stuff, they don't teach every language. Most schools, like primarily, depending on who you're talking to. So like, if you're in Austria, learning German in school is absolutely acceptable and fine. Like that was what you're supposed to learn. Like if you're gonna learn two languages, you better learn German because you want to be successful. You gotta know German, and that's just kind of how it was for that. But then you look at other like smaller like even Hungarian and just learning the Hungarian language. I guess my point is that there was a lot of inequality there. Like I don't know the name of the languages now, dang it. Czechoslovakia, if you're from Czech, if you're a Romanian, even Polish dialects, things like that. Any of these smaller minority group dialects, you pretty much did not have representation in the government. They didn't care about you really. They treated you as second-class citizens, and that's pretty much how it was. And they got tired of it. You know, they didn't teach your languages in school. They expected you to learn the language, the common language, which would be whatever was priority in that area. So it'd be the main language in the area. So a lot of people just felt like that they're in an empire that doesn't care about them. And that was the biggest thing. It was a huge political issue. Austria-Hungarian Empire lost land to Italy. They pretty much lost land all over. They also broke their promise. They were supposed to help out Russia, and they didn't in a war, and Russia lost the war. I think they were going against not Turkey. They had a war pretty much with someone close enough that Austria could have helped, and they didn't. They were actually obligated to help because of Russia maintaining their empire and helping them with Hungary during that war, but they didn't, and that actually led to Russia's defeat, and that defeat actually led to the rise of the Bolsheviks, and that communism pretty much rose up in Russia, and it was almost directly related to them losing to that war. It really helped that along. So yeah, Austria-Hungary, I'm sorry if I'm kind of going all over the place on this one. This is probably one of the hardest topics I've talked about, but pretty much as a nation, it's just really huge. There's too many cultures, too many people, too many religions, and they could not find a way governmentally to have, I mean, you gotta think you're running two different governments. You could have laws that Austria passes, and they, hey, Austria's doing this with its people. We want you, Hungary, to do it. And Hungary says no. And Hungary had every right to. Hungary didn't have to have the same laws as Austria. So you just run into a lot of issues with trying to maintain the order. And I think a nation like obviously, let's say a nation just like Austria-Hungary formed in the same region, the same areas today, it'd be just fine. The reason why is because technology, distance doesn't matter anymore. Cars travel fast. You can make it from point A to point B really quickly. Just the world's a lot more closer together now, and that's why larger nations now make it better than I think larger nations in the past because of diversity. Diversity is not a big deal now in a nation, but diversity back then was a huge deal in a nation, and it's very challenging. You try to represent, you try to help everyone out, and a lot of that's the thing. All these minor groups in Austria-Hungary, a lot of them wanted independence. They wanted to have independent nations within the Hungarian Empire, but they did not want the Austro-Hungarian Empire to tell them that. They wanted to have to be like, yeah, it's our choice. We're gonna do that, and they'd be like, okay, yeah, let's do that, and just agree. There's a lot. I mean, I'm gonna dive more into it in the future, learn more about it. It's really fascinating. I also want to deep dive into like just the royal family on it and really learn more about them. Obviously, you see my profile picture. I always thought he's an awesome looking guy. I always thought he was really cool. I just don't know as much historically about him as I would like to. Not enough that I feel like I'd comfortably talk about him on a podcast. So, yeah, next topic on that one. We are going to swing back to that in a future episode. Austria-Hungary could literally probably be its entirely own episode, and that's a fact. Uh-oh. I think we're down to candy. I think we're down to the last topic here, and I know what it's going to be. WW1 tanks, because obviously I can't talk about a world war without talking about tanks. That's a crime, right? So pretty much, you think about World War I tanks, you think it'd be on both sides, but really Germany didn't actually make, like, they made tanks, but they didn't really like focus on tanks. They didn't have a reason. Like, they worked on anti-tank weaponry more than tanks. The Allies were the first group, the Allies, Entente, they were the first group to come up with actual tanks. And surprisingly, the best tanks in World War I, or the most modern tanks in World War I, were made by the French. The R-35, I believe. I could be wrong. But yeah, it's pretty much a small, very small tank, but it had the drivers in the front, turret. It was everything that kind of made a tank a tank. It was a very modern tank. And then you had like what the UK had, which was like, they literally called it like a land battleship. I mean, that's literally what it was. The big tracks and stuff, which, I mean, the requirements for it were like literally to be able to cross a trench, to be able to cross it and keep going. That was their main goal. So yeah, UK pretty much designed those tanks. Russia had their tanks. They made like the funny Tsar tank, the big wheels. They made some really cool, weird stuff, kind of memey stuff. But yeah, actually, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe the UK was the first group to work on tanks, and it was like literally land battleship project. And I believe the Navy was actually the one working on it, not even like the Army at the time. I believe it was more focused on a Navy thing for land, which is odd. I could be wrong about this. Don't quote me if I am, but I'm pretty sure the Navy worked on it within the UK. Maybe it moved over to the Army after that. But yeah, overall, I mean, they were like super large tanks, had a lot of cannons on them, a lot of machine guns, moved extremely slow, very prone to breaking down, not very reliable, did not handle well in terrain, barely. I mean, like they would not get taken out in battle. Usually they would travel until they broke down, and hopefully they pushed back the line, further, and they did their job. That's kind of like what they were designed to do. So yeah, so just kind of a random fact here that the French had the best tanks in World War One, in my opinion, and that's my opinion, and just based off what I learned. Axis didn't really build tanks, but yeah, and tanks are really pretty much around just because, back to that no man's land thing, they wanted something to go across the no man's land, push up. They could support infantry, could attack enemy infantry, and that was kind of their main goal. They could be taken out by artillery. There were anti-tank weapons to kind of designed to take them out, like bombs, grenades, things like that. But usually you didn't have to. They would just take themselves out. And Germany only made like 20 tanks. So they made a very small number of tanks. Just kind of, overall. But yeah, so again, another short topic. This episode was really a short topic episode, guys. And that's literally my last topic too. So other than that, I just want to tell everybody thank you for coming out and checking out episode 7. Hopefully everybody learned something cool this episode. Sorry if it seemed kind of light. I will make it heavier next episode, I promise. Holiday season is coming up, and just a heads up, I haven't decided exactly when I'm going to end season 1, because I do want to have seasons and I do want to have breaks between seasons, so I have not decided that yet. But I do know that it's going to be closer to holiday season because obviously I have a family. The reason why this podcast came out late in general is because Halloween, spent time with my family, and they're very important to me. I work 45 hours a week, sometimes more, depending on if I get called out. And when I'm not at work, I like to be with them if I'm not doing something like this. So, yeah. Other than that, guys, y'all have a good one. Y'all have a good week, good weekend coming up, and I will see you in episode 8.